tale of my travelling sandals from Australia through Saudi Arabia to Jamaica. Most of the content of this video is from Saudi Arabia in June 2014. Next video will be Chad, and excuse the background noise please. These little slippers have come a long way. I've had them since around 2013, so that's around 8+ years. Once upon a time, a long time ago, in a land far away, they were a size 10 when I bought them, but are now only a 7 or 8. They originated probably in China actually, but were purchased in Australia. They're now here with me in Jamaica and have been to many countries, but the one that had the most profound effect on them was Saudi Arabia. In May 2014, I travelled to Saudi Arabia because some people had sponsored my friend and her Egyptian husband to go for Umrah, which is the minor pilgrimage behind Hajj, because he was very ill at the time with cancer and had never been for Umrah before. My husband at the time was his friend as well. So we, his brother and another close friend of his, travelled together and were met by another friend whose wife was also Australian. Actually, also his other friend who came with us on the plane, his wife's also Australian, or from New Zealand actually. It's a long story, which will come after this introduction. But what happened with these slippers? After we finished staying in 5-star hotels and doing pilgrimage rites and visiting all the requisite religious touristy places, and after the others left, me and my husband at the time went to stay with his mother it was a normal sort of a house in a sort of less well-to-do neighborhood. The house had a couple of bedrooms, a living room, kitchen and a bathroom, as well as an outside majlis, which is a sort of large living room reserved for male visitors, which we stayed in, which had a bathroom which was across the small walled concrete courtyard. One day, as I was coming in from the bathroom into the main house, I left my slippers outside the door. Now, we're talking middle of the day in the middle of summer in Saudi Arabia. In a concrete oven of a courtyard. It was probably over 50 degrees Celsius. When I next saw my shoes, perhaps 30 minutes later, they looked quite different. When I was a kid in Australia, we used to get little toys in cornflakes packets, and sometimes you'd get what's called a shrinky, which was a plastic card with a cartoon picture on it, which you put in the oven and they shrunk. Well, that's what had happened to my slippers. My shoes were put into the oven of a Saudi Arabian summer in a concrete courtyard, and they went from a quite large size 10, they were too big at the time, to a curled up, shrunken size 7 or 8. Mind you, I flattened them out and continued to use them. They're pretty good now actually. They fit. So yeah, everything has a story, especially when you keep things for as long as I do sometimes. These are some well-travelled slippers and need some glue, but they're still going. Okay, disclaimer. I am using no specialized equipment. I just have my phone and my computer, and that's it. I'm using free software, and I don't have a proper microphone or anything. And I don't have any type of studio, so it's loud here sometimes. As I mentioned, my friend's husband was very sick, and the travelling was really difficult for him. We travelled on Garuda Airlines through Indonesia, stopping in Bali first and then Jakarta, before going on to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. Somehow they messed us around at some point. Our flight was delayed, or they gave away some of our seats, or perhaps they couldn't seat us together, which was going to be a problem for our friend. Whatever the reason was, they gave us an upgrade to business class for one of the legs of the journey. It must have been from Jakarta to Jeddah, but I don't exactly remember. The That's the only time I've ever had an upgrade in all my many years of traveling. It was great. The spaces included the usual TV and bed so you could lie down flat, but the food was the main difference. Well, space is always a big difference in planes, but the food, it was 5-star Indonesian cuisine with about 5 courses, and man was it delicious. This upgrade, though, would have been the best thing that could have happened for my friend's husband. The plane travel was one thing, but then we had to be processed at the airport in Saudi Arabia, and that takes ages. After that, we would also have to drive around 4 or 5 hours to Makkah, where we would end up later that evening. The colors are not proper in the camera. Like, I'm recording my voice. No. So that was me in 2014, recording the tunnel and not wanting to record my own voice. And here I am now in 2021, recording my own voice and still not wanting to record my own voice. So this is the tunnel in Makkah. We're going towards where we're going to stay. The light at the end of the tunnel. Tunnel thing again, because it's really cool. But I like tunnel noise, so if you don't like it, just fast forward 20 seconds. When we arrived in Makkah, we found out that we were going to be staying in the Hotel Zamzam Pullman, which is right outside the Haram, which is the mosque that houses the Kaaba. From the window of our room, we could see the Haram, and in fact see the Kaaba. This is the Kaaba up close in a photo that I took that evening. In the background, you can see the same pillars, minarets, and the big building behind it is the building that we were staying in. I'll explain the significance of the Kaaba to Muslims later on. This is a picture of my ring finger actually, which was kind of crushed in an incident that happened while we were staying there, which is actually a story for another time. It's the story of one of my 3 brushes with death in in some of the biggest mosques in the world. These are the same minarets from outside and the entrance to the hotel building that we were staying in from closer up. We left Makkah 1 or 2 days later, traveling to Medina to visit the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's mosque there. Again, we were lucky enough to be sponsored to stay in a 5-star hotel right near the mosque, and I think the group stayed there maybe about 3 days. These are street scenes as we're driving out of Makkah. Our friend pipes up that I'm videoing and it's going to be really fast. I've left the English pieces of the original video in.
This is going to be just very fast video.
This
is going to be very fast.
I know.
Look at it.
It's fun though, it works. Yeah. It's interesting to look at. I missed all of the construction.
لا هو مش معناها الشركة ما
I think we stayed near here one time.
معناها طبعا
I think we stayed
واضح.
near here. Heard most of the conversation in the bus was in Arabic. Only my friend and myself were not Arabic speakers. The rest of everyone else, the men, were all Arabic speakers. So most of the time everything was in Arabic. We were only lucky to get a bit of a translation now and then, especially when we went on touring trips around Medina in the coming days. This was my third trip to Saudi Arabia. The first one was in 2006 with my husband, the second with my two oldest sons in 2009, and in that one I was desperate to get home. In a minute you'll hear me discussing this with my friend. We were in Makkah for a few days or a week, maybe 9 days total, and we were meant to go to Medina, but I was just desperate to get home. Really desperate, and I didn't have any idea why. No idea why, but I'll tell you in a minute. Also, we're traveling in the late afternoon and into the night because it's extremely hot. Oh, there's a rooster. Extremely hot in Saudi Arabia.
You know, when I was here with the boys, we didn't go to Medina. Because I had this overwhelming urge to go home. We were only here for 2.5 weeks or something. I just wanted to go home. I found out later, probably a year and a half later, that Eli's dad had actually was going to put papers into the court while I was away because he found out I was overseas. So I think that's why I was like, because when he did put papers in, he used the same ones that he had written, and they were dated, like when I was here.
It's interesting that they accepted them. They were so old.
And full of craziness. Yeah. The whole thing's just...
So that recording was a bit quiet, and I don't know if I'll be able to make it louder. So what happened was that while I was away with my two oldest sons, and I left my other two at home, my third son's father was writing court papers for planning to take my third son. And I don't mean writing sensible court papers because I was some kind of delinquent mother. No, I mean writing the craziest, ridiculous stuff you could ever imagine, because since I had become Muslim a few years earlier, he thought, woohoo, now I can take the kid. And he did actually take him soon after I became Muslim, but the court gave him back. But at this point in 2009, he's writing all sorts of crazy, illegal stuff you're not meant to write because it's not true and just scandalous, to take to the court, apparently, because he thought that he might just take my son while I was away. But of course, I didn't actually know this at the time. All I knew was I was mad to get home. Normally, why would I want to go home? I was on a holiday. I was doing something that is great to do, and we had another week or two left, and I just wanted to go home. It wasn't for about a year and a half till I found out that he had been writing these papers because he put them into the court. The same ones that he'd been writing in 2009. He put them into the court in 2011 with some extra ridiculousness. That's when I realized that's why I wanted to come home. So now I have an opportunity to explain a little bit about the Kaaba, as I said I would back when we saw the pictures of that in Makkah. I'll insert a picture now. The Kaaba is built, the black box that you can see. Right now it doesn't really have anything in it. It may have a few things on the walls. Yeah, so I just checked, and so there's basically 3 pillars inside the Kaaba and some hanging lamps, but that's all. Before the Prophet Muhammad became the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there were all types of idols in there, and they were smashed or taken out at some point. I'm not sure exactly when. The Kaaba itself was built by the Prophet Ibrahim, called Baytullah, the house of Allah, the house of God, close to the well of Zamzam, which is when the Prophet Abraham left his wife. In Islam we say wife, Hajar, but in Jewish traditions, what did they say? That she was the servant of Abraham's wife, Sarah, if I'm correct. Anyway, his son, Hajar was Prophet Abraham's son's mother, Ismail, and he was with his mother at that point, and he scratched the ground with his legs and he's crying because he was hungry and thirsty, and the well of Zamzam came up. So the Kaaba is right next to the well of Zamzam, and the mosque, the great mosque in Makkah, is built all around it, and the well of Zamzam is still there and supplies as much water as is required by all the pilgrims all the time. It's also piped to Medina, to the mosque in Medina as well. So this is the main pilgrimage site for Muslims from all over the world to come to at least once in their lifetime, if they can. When people come on pilgrimage to Mecca, they almost always also travel to Medina to visit the Prophet's mosque. These pilgrimages have been going on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, long before we had aeroplanes. These days, of course, it takes only a day or so to get to Saudi Arabia. In the past, it used to take weeks and months as people would travel by land and by sea. We arrived in Medina late in the evening again and stayed in another beautiful hotel. The main thing I remember about that hotel, though, was it was freezing cold. It was really, really hot outside and freezing cold inside. So the next day we went to the mosque. I have a few pictures here of the inside of the big mosque in Medina. It's the second most important mosque in Islam. There are not many pictures here of the actual mosque. To be honest, as a woman, you don't see much of the mosque anyway. Probably 3/4 of it, 2/3 to 3/4, is the men's section, and most of the historic areas are in the front section. You can visit the front section at particular times to see where the Prophet, peace be upon him, is buried, which is where his house used to stand, and pray in an area called the Rauda, or garden. The sermons are broadcast in several different languages, and here we can see the outside, the kind of umbrellas which fold inside out as compared to an umbrella, one of the entrances. You see, they fold up when it's not sunny. I don't know when that would be, but they do fold up sometimes, and in the meantime they shade the whole outside area. This is actually a wall or a fence through which I took pictures and people on the wall. It's actually, I think, just outside the mosque in Medina. They made some nice frames for photographs. In the couple of days that our group was together, we travelled around Medina, seeing the religious sites, and one of the first places that we went to was Mount Uhud. Uhud is a red rock mountain just at the edge of Medina. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that Uhud is our friend, that we love it and it loves us. It's actually one of 3 large red rock mountains that I know of, only 2 of which I've been to: Uhud, Ayers Rock or Uluru in Australia, which I haven't been to despite the fact that I'm Australian, and Arunachala, which is a red rock mountain that's said to be an incarnation of the Hindu god Shiva, which is in Tamil Nadu, in a town called Tiruvannamalai. in the south of India. These types of mountains always seem to have a lot of significance for the people who live in that area and for the religions of that area. While we were there, I climbed up into part of the mountain. The mountain itself was actually warm to the touch, kind of like a person, but also up there I saw people with their goats, taking their goats up there to graze, because there are some bushes and grasses and things up there. And it was nice in the late afternoon, evening, sitting on the nice warm rock. Not that warm was a problem. It had been very hot. But yeah, sort of watching the sunset in the late afternoon and just relaxing before we got back in the bus. This next place is Masjid Quba, or the Mosque of Quba. This place holds a very special place in my heart. I'm not exactly sure why, but it is absolutely beautiful. It's a smaller mosque on the sort of outskirts of Medina. It was actually the first mosque built in Medina, just before the Prophet's mosque, the big one in the middle. And Quba used to be a separate village to Medina, even though now it's very much in Medina. When I was there in 2006, I was staying just with my son, who was quite young, and we walked one day from the Prophet's mosque to Quba, not knowing that that was actually a traditional thing to do. And I think it was that walk that just put Quba in my heart. I don't know. It's there. I've normally been there at sunset time, and it's just seriously beautiful. Really, that's all I can say. Speaking of beautiful things, then there's this hotel again. And after this, we traveled around Medina again for the last day before most of our group left to go home. And we went to stay with my mother-in-law in the house that I mentioned at the start with the story about my sandals. So this might have been the first time that I met Aya, because before that, I think when I had been to Saudi Arabia, she was living in Riyadh. But in the meantime, I'm not sure if I'd met her before, but she moved to Medina and was staying in Medina. One of her other sons lives in Medina. Aya was a lovely old lady, tall African lady. She'd come from Chad through Saudi Arabia with her boys and met up again with her husband in Saudi Arabia after some years with 5 sons. And of course I only met her when she was an old lady. And she was a very serious looking, quite serious religious woman, but when she smiled, she had a smile like a little girl, which is very much like another friend of mine, an old lady in Australia who came from Croatia 50-something years ago, a friend of mine called Mary. Actually, my husband's other wife, yes, he had another wife. He does have another wife, but not me anymore. She actually mentioned when she met my friend Mary that Mary reminded her of Aya. And yeah, so we stayed in her house, which you will see in a minute, for several days or a week or so before we went back to Australia. And we had a very nice time with her. We did also visit Masjid Quba with her on the traditional, I think, Saturday when people go there from Masjid al-Nabawi back to Quba at sunset time. back to my sandals or slippers. So the room that we stayed in was very nice, but very, very hot. The air conditioner would struggle to cool it down even in the night time because the houses are made of concrete and doesn't have any sort of insulation. And this is the courtyard, which is where my slippers were turned into shrinkies. And back to our room. After our friends had left, we went for a drive to see the Islamic University, which is where my son was studying at the time, but he was back in Australia on holidays. Actually, he's just finished now after around 7.5 years, studying Arabic for 2 years, an Islamic law degree for around 4 years, and a postgraduate diploma. And back to Australia. Yeah, so the Islamic University of Medina takes students from all over the world on scholarship. So you don't have to pay for anything, and in fact they give you a little pocket money, which may or may not be enough to live on. But one thing about this university is that there's no women allowed. So we actually couldn't go inside the university, although I have been around the back near the dormitories. Actually, my second son was studying there as well at one point. But yeah, we're coming up to the gates now, and you'll see on the front of the gates the time and the temperature. And it actually says it's 4:53 p.m. and 43 degrees Celsius. There it is. So around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's still over 40 degrees Celsius. Previously, I was wanting to object to not being allowed in the university because I would have liked to attend the graduation, but it was COVID time anyway, so I don't think there even was a graduation. The first time I travelled to Saudi Arabia was in 2006, and the last time was, I believe, in 2016. When I first went, really the only way anyone could go to Saudi Arabia was for a pilgrimage visa, Hajj or Umrah, or perhaps some types of business visas or visit visas, but these were, I think, very minimal and very hard to get. Now, much has changed in Saudi Arabia. There are now tourist visas. I don't know how many tourists have been. Women can drive. It used to be that it was illegal for women to drive in Saudi Arabia because women did not, and I would suggest mostly do not, go anywhere without men or in a group together, perhaps say they're going to visit someone. But even now, I would think that it would be very unlikely or unusual for a woman to travel alone in Saudi Arabia, whether she's from Saudi Arabia or she's visiting Saudi Arabia. It would be extremely unusual. To give you an example of something that happened to me the first time I was in Saudi Arabia, I was a coffee lover. I still am. And I was walking with my son in Medina and came across a sort of franchise coffee shop. And went inside. Okay, no problem. It's only men in there, but it's okay. I was with my son anyway. And ordered coffee. Okay, that was alright. Paid everything, got the coffee. Okay, I went to sit down at the table, and I was told in no uncertain terms that I cannot sit down inside. I have to leave with the coffee. I cannot drink the coffee inside because I'm a woman. These rules are based on Islamic precepts of men and women not associating freely, and also women needing a guardian. But I was technically with a guardian, so that wasn't it. So I was sent out. Meanwhile, there are men sitting in the coffee shop smoking. So smoking is not allowed Islamically, but that was acceptable. Whereas for a woman to sit down and drink a cup of coffee was not acceptable. I was mad. I was some serious mad. Anyway, I would think that now that wouldn't happen. But that was 2006, so that's about 17 years ago. I was also at the time dressed entirely in black from tip of my head to tip of my toes. So there was no objection to how I was dressed. I was not dressed like a Westerner. So it was principally the traditional old Arab culture in place rather than strict Islamic law. It's always posted as Islamic law, but that's not exactly the case. As is all over the world, in every culture, there are different presumptions for women than there are for men. Now I'm in Jamaica. There are also Jamaica is a reasonably equitable country in that manner, but still there are always cultural presumptions about differences between the behavior of men and women and how that is judged. These pictures were all taken on the drive from Medina towards Jeddah, which is where my ex-husband's brother was living at the time, or he was living, I think, outside Jeddah somewhere. I always enjoyed driving or long drives, especially in the late afternoon, evening, even nighttime driving. This drive, I think, took around 6 or 8 hours, I'm not entirely sure. We were coming to the end of a really nice trip. Actually, I was feeling very fortunate to have made this trip, and it was interesting because a few months earlier, at the end of 2013 and into 2014, we had been on a really amazing trip from Australia to Ethiopia and into Jerusalem, back to Ethiopia, and then to Chad, where my ex-husband is from. And we had been hoping at that time to also visit Saudi Arabia, to do the pilgrimage, but also to see my ex-husband's mother, which we were able to do, thankfully. And yeah, of course, at the time, we had no idea that someone would partially sponsor us to actually travel as we had previously hoped. These pictures are my ex-husband's brother's house, where we stayed for 1 or 2 days. These people actually, right now, there's a present waiting for me in Australia, which has come home with my daughter-in-law from the ladies, I think, at this house, which is so nice because this is the one and only time that I met them. This family now lives in Medina proper. This was their previous house. There is a prophecy that says that Saudi Arabia or the Arab Peninsula will be green. Meanwhile,
You know what this place looks like? Yeah, I'm aware of that. More on this side though. It looks like after the nuclear war, after the end of the world, this is like wasteland. It's like people pulled themselves back together a little bit, got something started again. Look at it.
some more footage of what I was rudely referring to as wasteland. I think we might need to get David Attenborough in to rebut my theory. Yeah. Well, you know, in the desert, there's always life and there's creatures, and you can find beauty in anything. But man, it's so hot. So hot here, you can see. And if you wouldn't mind just flipping your screen, because I changed the camera around. This trip actually pretty much marked the end of a really difficult time of about 1 year and 3 months or so in my life, which I might go into in some later video perhaps. But right now at this point, going back home to Australia, I was running my business, my Shadra Islamic Kindergarten, which was one of the only, I think, about 2 or something Islamic childcare centres in Australia at the time. It sadly came to an end in 2018 when the government knocked down my building and I couldn't find another one. But at this point in 2014, it's just building and building nicely. Building numbers, and things are just starting to go really well. I think it was also around the end of 2014 that I was able to take my youngest son overseas for the first time, which was also a big breakthrough in my life to that point. As I mentioned, probably the next travel video that I would do is the trip that we had done just prior to this to Ethiopia, Jerusalem, and Chad. And I will also start making some videos about living with long COVID, which I've had for almost a year now. So to recap a little, I'm Australian, my name's Khadija, I am in Jamaica, I have travelled a lot in this world, and I probably have a lot to say. I might even appear on camera one day, you never know. So if you're watching this far, that's amazing, and thank you very much. And as everyone says, don't forget to subscribe and like and share it with anyone who you think might enjoy. My advice for today would be embrace life. Don't be afraid of it. Live with your eyes open. Worrying about the past or the future can change neither of these things. All any of us have really is right now, and only you are responsible for that. Thank you. Peace. Salam. Shalom.